Well, Jumbo everyone, thank you so much for joining me on yet another episode of News in Focus. I trust that you've been well. I'm Linda Alela Mathambo. Now today we're going to touch on matters economy, the country's economy state. Of course, we are questioning that. We're having stories about the cash crunch. We're having stories about the Eurobond. We're having questions, and everyone would honestly want to know what is happening with the country. And of course, we have high interest rates, and it is worrying. And that is the reason why today we've termed it very, very necessary to talk about this story on a deeper ground, so that we can all get to be at par, and of course get to understand the picture. And joining me on site, a great gentleman. We have Honorable Isaac Mwaura with me right here. He's the nominated member of Parliament for Special Interest, and of course he's a member of Parliament on Budget and Appropriation Committee. So he's going to shed more light about the whole story. Of course, when you're having someone from the budget end, then you can be sure that at least we'll have a clear picture. And of course, again, we also have Kiama Kara. You have met him, of course, a household name when it comes to matters economy. He is the Development Policy Analyst and Programs Coordinator, Kenya Debt Relief Network. And that's the reason why we're having them here, specialists on this ground, so that they can tell us, they can give us a clear picture on what is really happening in the country's economy. Karibu sana, gentlemen. Thank you so much for finding time to be here with us.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
We're really hoping to hear so much from you people, because we've been having questions, lots of questions. And you know, it's even worse when we have wrangles with the leaders, when it is being politicized, because we realize that the economy is the backbone of every country, of every actually institution. Because if the economy is not stable, then you can be sure that that country or that institution or organization is bound to fail. So we'll start with you people, and of course I'll get to want to know, where are we as a country economically?
Yeah, I think, Linda, when such an issue is politicized, it's very good, because then
it's very good.
It's very good, because we are starting to speak issues.
Yeah.
It's about looking at who is saying what data are they looking at. But again, it's also very good in the sense that people start being objective, because the figures don't lie.
Yeah.
You may spin, you may sing lullabies, you may do PR gimmicks, but by the end of the day, the economy is not doing well. And the economy is not doing well because of the fact that in a developing country, the biggest market we have is government.
Yeah.
So people are not getting into government to do service delivery and out of altruism, but they are getting to government to trade. And we have a history of individuals who earn less than 100,000 shillings, but are multi-billionaires in this country. And the association is with government, either as members of parliament, either as ministers or PSS and what have you. And you would actually be surprised that parliament, where I sit, majority of the members of parliament are former accountants, procurement officers, heads of state corporations, PSS, ministers, name them. Why am I trying to bring that into perspective? It's because as we speak right now, we have had the statistics from the National Treasury.
Can I ask a question on statistics before you continue, Mheshimiwa? Last week we had two conflicting economic statistics, you know, one from the purportedly from the World Bank, and another one from the opposition. And the big question right now is, which one is right? Because normally I would say that I know in public domain we'd actually concur with the one from the World Bank. But the big question is, for the sake of the common wananchi, which one is right before we get to?
If you are to believe the World Bank, you will be setting one of your foot at sea.
Okay.
The IMF and World Bank, the Bretton Woods institutions, were not set up to help economies.
Yeah.
They were set up to reconstruct Europe after the Second World War. And ever since, their role is not about helping economies to grow. It is about them lending their money, like any other bank, and them getting back their profit.
The profit.
And you know, banks give you what you don't require, because you have refused to manage your own liquidity. So anything from the World Bank is just veering us into the wrong direction. And
what do you think about that?
Well, thanks, Linda. This is an interesting start to the conversation, and I must say it's pretty hard not to agree with the sentiments that Mheshimiwa is presenting here. And I would start off by saying, or just coming back from what he was saying, it's important that we situate the conversation we are having around the economy within the political dynamics of our nation. That's point one. The second point, which he has actually pointed out, is that we need to see that conversation within the broad spectrum of what our political and economic classes in this country. And I think for me the main emphasis is this conversation need not get diluted within our usual cleavages of what side of political orientation do you belong to, because that's the only time then you're able to be objective with the numbers that we are getting. Otherwise, if you wear the lenses of your own political persuasions and you're about to be a bit biased or sort of torture the data to fit your particular aspirations. Then the third point is there's a national dynamic around our economy, which is an important conversation that every Kenyan must have now. But there's an angle as to how does it link to the international political architecture and the implications of the global division of labor, especially around political economy. And I think that's what Honorable Mwaura is trying to point at, that there's a presumed ascription that if the World Bank says it, it's right. And that's not necessarily the truism when it comes to developing countries and in places like Africa. The legacy for Africa and countries like Kenya, from World Bank, IMF, Bretton Woods institutions-led policies, the structural adjustment programs, the poverty reduction strategies, and that whole realm of economic policy modeling and advice that has come to Africa as a one-size-fits-all, as a cut-and-paste economic model, has battered the socio-infrastructure investments that post-independent Africa had made. It has distorted our trade regimes. It has severely compromised our capacity to shore up our manufacturing and industrial base. And all these policies are interlinked. But having said so, now the fundamental question for us as we now move into a more detailed national conversation is how do we look at the aggregate ordering of that global political economic order, its implications in the past for our country, and a few steps and efforts that we have made to try and get out of it. Then see that in the perspective of today. Are we forging a progressive discourse going forward? Are we feeling like we are rooted on the same step? Or are we actually making a few steps backwards, but trying to justify that on the glossy imagery of that we have World Bank backing, IMF credentials and this kind of thing?
I mean, that's how it started. I'm actually convinced, I'm actually tempted to come and cross to the end, because I remember in the report they say that Kenya is growing steadily economically. Yes, slow as compared to other sub-Saharan countries. But then again, we hear that we don't have enough funds. And the question comes in, why? Yet we are growing.
Yes, Linda, because for them, as long as we are servicing their debts, we are doing well. We usually have a budget forecast, economic growth forecasting. And before we do the budget, we have a budget review outlook paper where basically we look at what is happening at the macro level and the issues within the borders of this country and outside. And I remember, like this year, the National Treasury was forecasting that the economy was going to grow at 6.9%. Where the reality was that it was not going to be more than 6%, if at all. Last year, after having done 3 quarters, they were telling us that the economy was supposed to grow at 5.4%, but the aggregate at that point was 4.7%. Now, very interesting how Treasury thinks, because the PS there is a man from IMF. And I think I had a lot of faith with Henry Rotich because he's Harvard trained. But unfortunately, I'm seeing him, he's just a spin doctor. And you know, they are telling the president and the government the things that are short term. And let me give you an example. I wish we had the whole time here, but let me say this. As members of the budget committee last year, we slashed over 100 billion shillings from expenditure because we thought it was not proper. We also went ahead to question KRA's capacity to collect about 56 billion shillings. So ideally, we were saving the country about 150 billion. And then what happened? Because those monies were allocated to individuals who had some interest in them. We were called, and we were a lot of noise was made to us that we were actually doing away with government priorities. So if you look at our past budget, within 5 years, Linda, we have grown from a budget of less than R1 trillion to 2.1 trillion, out of which KRA is purportedly collecting 1.2 trillion. I beg to differ, because their monthly target is 72 billion. So that comes about 846 billion or thereabout. So KRA is not even collecting R1 trillion shillings. What has been cushioned in this country is the carryover effect of previous collections at the end of the financial year. Now, if you have a 2.1 trillion budget, more than 50% is through domestic and external borrowing. How is it sustainable in the long term? That's the biggest question here, and that's why you are seeing now the government is going to the local market to borrow to pay salaries, crowding out local investors, and of course, having the effect that now the interest rates are very high, because they went to the market asking for money at 14%. The banks ganged up and said, we are going to give you at 23%. They settled at 20.5%, essentially 21%. Now people are being sent letters that you are going to pay your mortgage, like there's a friend of mine, mortgage 35,000 shillings over and above what they had actually
agreed.
So is this country going forward?
So clearly, Kiama, we agree that at some point, okay, with all this alarm brewing up, on the country's economic state, should we say that there is substantial reason for us to have all this alarm? And what can we do about it so at least we can go back to equilibrium?
This is both a sort of a hard issue and a soft issue, depending on how you look at it. And I think, Linda, just from the level that Honorable Mwaura has set it up, which is pretty hard not to agree with, is that first and foremost, economic modeling in itself, it's not an end. It's just the means that is supposed to guide you on the basis of how you build your horizons, shape your parameters, decide what you want to do and how you want to do it. Now, first and foremost, I think what we are suffering as a nation is some sense of hubris around major pronouncements and projections that we cannot meet. So the question I want to ask myself every day is, when we actually say we are going to collect R1 trillion for revenue, is it based on anything substantive and anything fundamental, or is it just a nice figure we pick out there and we think is impressive? Because the question is, if you need to walk from here to Kangemi to get home, you can as well tell me you hang on here and you get a ride from a chopper that will take you home. But that's a pipe dream. You still walk home at whatever point is it that you need to get home. And I think that's what is what our nation is suffering from. The sort of projections, the sort of statements we are making about our potential and our ability seem not to be founded on anything substantive and anything solid. So what you have is, we're starting to become a nation that we end up becoming a cumulative total sum of postponed issues or failed issues. Whereas, like for instance, and it's amazing to be sitting here with Honorable Mwaura from the Budget and Appropriations Committee, because we can get it straight from the people who interrogate these figures. The benefit which most of us may not have or get to it later is that if you have to project that you have economic growth at 6.9%, you need to show us what informs the decision about which you came to 6.9%. And please don't hold us back on that the IMF has told you that our debt at 50% or 52% of the GDP is sustainable in the midterm. What does it mean when you say sustainable in the midterm? It's just some nice economic language that says we have no idea how we will deal with it, but give us a bit more time. We'll work out some contingent measures to address that.
So who's talking about, who's telling us the truth about the debt sustainability?
I think for the debt sustainability issue, one thing we first must agree, debt is not wrong purely from an economic point of view, because we grow on revenues or investments or debt, even at a personal level. But the question we are speaking about here, and this is a fundamental question that we must push out, when we talk about debt sustainability, let's not confuse it with some issues that are thrown around by economists and especially the technocrats in government around prudence and management.
Yeah.
Those are not the fundamental issues that Kenyans are speaking about. Kenyans are speaking with, can you give us a very specific criteria and mechanism that measures and convinces us that our debt is sustainable? As it stands, including the IMF measure itself, the net present value, points it that the debt to GDP ratio should be at the uppermost 45%.
Okay.
Now we are going 52%. The same IMF is coming back and tweaking its own position and trying to make arguments that it's because of a colossal investment into infrastructure and the returns are yet to be felt. So we are sustainable in the midterm. I don't think so. And maybe very quickly now to finish up. I think what we will need a better presentation, and maybe Honorable Mwaura can point us out in this direction, on the basis of how the debt management strategy that Treasury presents, how do they, not only in the cumulative sense, but even on a sector-by-sector basis give the configuration of that sustainability account that they are speaking about.
Okay, Mwaura, so the question is this. Should we trust the Treasury that we are within the limit when it comes to debt sustainability?
No.
We should not.
No, I have differed with them.
Yes.
Let me give you an example, what Kiama has asked, like how Treasury does economic growth.
Yeah.
We have had the president saying that the economy is going to grow just because of the SGR project by 1.5%. So I asked them, how did you come up with that figure? They said that the investment in the SGR is about 300 billion. And each year we are going to be investing about 100 billion.
Okay.
Which is about 1.5% of our GDP, which is placed at around 6 trillion. So really, that is, you cannot measure economic growth through inputs. You know? The other thing is the cost of the SGR itself is inflated. So already we have lost money because you get one for the price of three. So that even when you look at our roads, 1 kilometer of road in Malaysia is about 25 million Kenya shillings. In Kenya, the other day they were told to do a quotation for the annuity program. They were costing up to 80 million a kilometer. Another day, through the budget committee, I wanted a bridge for the disabled people. I thought it would be done by 30 million. I was told it's 300 million. Where on earth do you do a bridge at 300 million? So if you are to borrow your own personal finances, and then you expend them lavishly. You drink, you buy things that do not add value to your life, or rather that are just for the sake of whatever. By the end of the day, you will have to service that loan. Now, what we are doing, Linda, is that we are in a situation where, because we mismanage those resources, now we are borrowing more. Now, if you look at the public debt register, and Kiama can comment more about it because I'm sure that's what the organization tracks, you'll be surprised at what we borrowed for. We borrowed for a fertilizer company that was never constructed. We borrowed for issues that really, if you look at them by the face of it, they look like they're speaking to the issues of Mwananchi. But in actual sense, those monies ended up in people's pockets. So the question is, if you look at the counties, Kenyans will be surprised to know that the counties have borrowed up to 40 billion shillings without the approval of the controller of budget. Then we go ahead and do a Eurobond, and this money is appropriated or rather shared offshore without the approval again of the Office of the Controller of Budget. And what has been happening in this country is that government money is left to lie in banks, accrues interest, which people benefit from before it is dispersed. What does that have effect on project delivery? Because you delay projects so that you can accrue interest. So by the time you hit, we are now in the second quarter of the financial year. That is half year, and yet debts have not been paid. So, and the first charge that we do when we collect revenue is to pay debts. So somebody to come and tell us that we should believe, that according to the IMF, I don't know, World Bank Index, we are doing a 216% against the threshold of 300 if we are doing badly, to come and tell us that the US economy has borrowed 100% of the GDP and Japan 200%, yet our economy is about spending, not production and productivity.
So we're saying that it's not an informed decision that the Treasury decides.
How many cars is Kenya producing? The amount of money we are spending is how we the middle class are buying these from China, from America, and whatever. If you look at balance of payment issues, they are serious. We are literally not exporting anything, but we're importing everything. So that even when we make these infrastructural projects, are we making these roads for our own productivity, or is it for the flow of goods and services from other economies. That is something that we need to ask ourselves.
Okay, well, viewer down there, of course, it's all about the country's economic state, and we have a very tight discussion right here based on facts and figures, and that's why you need to stick around. Of course, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with the Eurobond and the cash crunch and all these sagas that are going on in the economic of the country.